Hi, friends. Welcome to the Mobile Bev Pros podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing mobile bar and event professionals with the information they need to succeed. I'm your host, business coach, and founder of the Mobile Bar Academy, Sarah Murphy. In each episode, the Mobile Bev Pros team will bring you industry experts, information, anecdotes, and opinions with the goal of assisting you in building a profitable, sustainable, and successful business that supports you in creating wealth. I'm excited to share with you today's episode, so let's get started. Today on the podcast, we are talking about the very, very sexy topic of operations. It's Operations Month. Not that means anything to anybody else, but we, at the beginning of the year, kind of parsed up the year by month as to topic themes. And last month was pricing, and we did a couple of podcasts on pricing. And this month is operations. And we were both reflecting prior to going live here that we come from operational backgrounds. That's kind of the tool in our tool belt that we use to climb the ladder by seeing the gaps in operations that could help make things smoother, which benefits both the company and the staff, making lives easier.
Yeah, and to start with, what is operations, Sarah? Because operations covers so many different facets of running a business. It's like literally everything from taxes to hiring and onboarding, right? To what POS system you use. So can you tell us a little bit more about what even is operations?
Yeah, I love that you started with that question because I would have not at all thought to address that. Anything could be operations, right? So are you operating a business? Therefore, everything that you do to do that is operations. And for those that are unfamiliar with my 6-pillar system, it's almost like a pizza pie. The 6 pillars have marketing, sales, operations, money, leadership, and client experience. And the client experience wraps around the whole pizza pie. And operations for me is what starts happening when someone signs and pays. Now we have a live one. We have obligation, but now we have to go and do the things. And so that's really where we're starting the conversation today. So you could make an argument, certainly, that marketing and sales have operational components, but we're not going to talk about those today. We're talking specifically about what happens once someone signs and pays.
Yeah, which is huge, right? Because this is the onboarding process all the way through the deliverables and then could potentially go on after that. But I'm going to let you decide as to where we cut that off for a single podcast today, because what you're giving today was actually part of our client experience workshop, which was a blast for anybody who missed out. And you gave this over the course of several hours. And so we're going to crunch it down today, of course, into podcast, bite-sized format. But we get this question a lot, okay, somebody's paid me, now what? And so I'm excited for everybody on the podcast today, to really, if you're new here, figure out what does that look like. But if you're an OG and you've been in the industry for a long time and you feel like you're recreating the wheel every single time somebody signs an invoice, this too could be really powerful for you.
Yeah, potentially one of my favorite parts of that workshop regarding this particular section was that we had an attendee who's been in business, in this very same business, for over 20 years. And she had major takeaways around the way we frame this. And I had always inherently thought of operations in the way I'm about to lay out. It didn't ever feel like it was mind-blowing to me. So it was fun to see people go, oh my gosh, I had never even really thought to break down that operational process like that. And so just super high level, when I think about operations, we start with onboarding. From onboarding to offboarding, that's when we're doing the work for the client. And there's the 5 phases. The first being onboarding. The onboarding phase is the very first stage. It's generally the term that we use for the time that immediately happens after the booking confirmation. It's also where customers are largely deciding whether or not they've made a good decision with their money or a bad decision with their money, because that's when they're first expecting to see value. Now, with the mobile bar industry, we have to remember they're booking us months in advance, right? So they're going to pay us potentially 50% of a very large bill, and then it could be crickets for a really long time. So it's important for us to recognize that psychologically, buyers want to see something as soon as they give you their money. And it's probably not enough to just be like, payment received, thanks. Right? Like they want to know a few things. They want to know what's next. They want to know what they can expect from you going forward. They want to know what you expect from them. Like, is there anything you need from me at this point? They also want to know, like, what does success look like and how, if I have questions between now and then, like, how do I reach you? So we want to wrap up all of those little bits and pieces into whatever it is that we do after they sign and pay. If it's an email that you send that's like, thank you for your payment, we've received it. Here's what comes next, right? Just remember that email to them is the very first email where you're in an official relationship. And this is all part of the sexy selling workshop. So intimacy is the thread that ties the client journey together as a part of this workshop. We can't just leave them hanging with like, thanks, that was great. Bye. Right. We want to make them feel good about that investment in our relationship. And so we can do that in a number of different ways. Some people send gifts. They're like, thanks. And like they send them snail mail, something. I don't necessarily think that's necessary as long as we address the emotional needs that they have at that point, which is, did I make a good decision and investment with these funds? And that requires addressing those questions that, they are likely going to have, which is again, like, okay, what's next? What do you expect from me? What can I expect from you? What does success look like from this engagement? And how can I reach you if I need you between now and when we next talk? And when do we talk again? How do we engage going forward? What are the terms of this relationship? Can I call you at any time? Can I email you at any time? When will I hear from you next? Like, help me out here.
And one of my favorite things that you pointed out during the sexy selling workshop was that this will make or break the rest of the relationship. This is the most pivotal moment of the entire engagement, more so than your marketing, messaging, the sales conversation, because once they've booked you, if the initial onboarding engagement creates a lack of trust or a sense of dissatisfaction, they will actually carry that through the entirety of their relationship with you, at least subconsciously, but potentially consciously as well. And it also works the other way. And so if this initial point of contact feels really great for them, there is a sense of trust and satisfaction created in this moment, then they'll carry that moving forward, which potentially, if there are hiccups later on in the process, they'll be more forgiving of those hiccups because of this initial experience versus being less forgiving if this initial experience is shite, right? So that was my favorite takeaway from this particular portion of the operations piece and the client experience.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. What you just referenced is a cognitive bias called excessive coherence, in the fact that first initial impression after they have kind of been vulnerable, right? And we could look at our own lives too. Like, think about the last time you were vulnerable. How'd that go? Did that go well or did that not go well? And if it went well, then you have solidified a sense of trust that even if they like mess up a little bit, at some point, you're kind of more willing to forgive them for those digressions. Wherein when you are a little bit vulnerable and that doesn't go well, even if they do things that attempt to win back the trust going forward, we're a little bit less likely to believe it or to let it change our mind. And so this initial onboarding is your opportunity to solidify the relationship with that client so that even if smaller things go poorly or expectations are misaligned and you have to realign those expectations, they're much more likely to just brush it off or be like, oh no, I totally get it, or rebound back from that temporary loss of trust. And that has to happen during onboarding, because if you, to your point, if you fail to do it during onboarding, it's way harder to do further on down the road. So the second stage in the operations phase is the planning phase. Potentially in our industry, this is the longest phase. Once someone's been onboarding, and there might be tasks in the onboarding phase aside from sending an email. I know for me, I'm a little analog. So I'd print out their contract, I'd create a folder, I'd put it on a physical calendar. I'd post shifts for the staff. Like there were a number of different tasks that I had during the onboarding phase for my business that weren't just aligning expectations with the client. After all of that, we go into the planning phase. And the planning phase is where we're gathering information, we're gathering supplies, we're doing a lot of the intangible work to make sure that this event goes off without a hitch. So we're asking questions, we're sourcing any supplies that we need that maybe need to be special ordered. We're crafting menu development. We're having conversations with the staff. We're reaching out to potentially the venue and figuring out like where are we going to be? Do they have an ice machine? All of these necessary bits and pieces happen during the planning stage. The planning stage could be a year long, right? If someone books you 18 months out and you onboard them, there might be a really long period of time where they're completely dormant in the planning phase, or maybe they, will send you emails every once in a while, like, oh, I saw this on Pinterest, and you're saving that to their file so that you have it, but you're really not doing a whole lot of tangible work on the event. This is all very, I don't want to say hypothetical, it's not, but it's intangible. It's not something that you can put your finger on. It's planning, it's organizing, it's coming up with the concept for this event. And the purpose of the planning stage is to set yourself up for success and your client up for success. So figuring out exactly what they expect, how you're going to satisfy those expectations, what information do you need in order to have this event go off to your particular standards. So the questions that I invite people to ask themselves around the planning stage so that it goes well is, aside from the details you gathered from your lead form, what information do you need from your clients to successfully execute this event? What information does your client need from you in order to have a full understanding of what to expect from the bar experience at their event? And what changes, if any, given those questions, would you need to make to your planning phase to ensure that you had all the necessary information and that you provided all the necessary information? We try and solve a lot of this through the pre-event questionnaire. If you're a member of the Academy, you already have access to that resource. That particular pre-event questionnaire is somewhat lengthy and has been crafted over many years. As things became evident during my own planning process that I was like, man, I really should ask that question, it got added to the pre-event questionnaire. And it's a great opportunity for us to get the information from the client, and then we utilize that information to then reflect back to them the information they need to know during the pre-event consultation or the cocktail tasting. Some people do cocktail tasting and some people do a pre-event consultation, and some people don't do either, which if you currently don't have at least a good 30 to 45 minute meeting with the client, 30 to 60 days. If it's a corporate client, it might look more like 2 to 7 days before the event, then I highly recommend you start doing that, because that is the place where you're going to align expectation with the most ease. And it's just the best time and place to ensure that they're on the same page as you are. You get the answers to the questions that you have remaining. They get the answers to the questions they have remaining, so that by the time you arrive on site, everyone knows who's doing what, who's responsible for what, where they need to go, what they need to do. And it just makes events so much smoother. But it never ceases to amaze me how many times we come across mobile bar owners who are not currently holding those meetings. So it's worth mentioning that during the planning stage, a meeting with the client should be scheduled and executed. Moving on to the staging phase. So this is stage 3, and this is where all the active event preparation goes into it. So for me, the planning stage started around 7 to 10 days before the event date. The purpose of the staging phase is to physically prepare for event execution. So while we've been doing a lot of that theoretical conceptual work during the planning stage, this is where we're physically doing work. We're packing, we're shopping, we're organizing physically the equipment that we would need in order to execute this event. This is where maybe your simple syrups are being made. All of the physical preparation goes into work here. This is when I'm washing the bar, repainting my satellite bar, because those things get dinged up seemingly every event. This is where We're confirming alcohol order delivery. We're sending final alignment emails to the host, the event planners, staff, all of that good stuff. This is really the last and final time for us to go over all of our information and make sure that we have everything we need, both physically and informationally, and that everybody is well informed as to what's about to go down. Probably one of the most crucial parts. I would say the planning stage can make the staging phase a lot smoother, but this is where rubber meets the road. By the time we get to the next phase, we're scrambling. We don't want to scramble, right? So all of the good preparation work happens during the staging phase.
This is my favorite thing about operations, specifically when you're creating standard operating procedures or when you're modifying and evolving those operational procedures. Everything about operations, the more standardized it can be, the more you set yourself up for success so that you can sleep the night before an event, right? So the onboarding phase leads seamlessly into the planning phase because you're gathering a lot of those initial details. And then the planning phase builds on those initial details. And then we move in to the staging phase, which builds seamlessly, if done properly, on the planning phase. And so, my favorite thing about operations is when you start to look at things like systems, they build on each other. And the more solid the foundation, the stronger the structure, and the more sleep you'll have pre-event. We hear so many people that are stressed out before an event, and that's just because they don't have these systems in place. They haven't created a system of self-trust, right? Because that's what you're doing here. You're creating a system of self-trust that not only benefits you, but benefits your client because your client feels confident that you know what you're doing. But you can also feel confident that you know what you're doing at every stage.
The best thing about what you just mentioned is that when you are intentional about your system and you have built trust with your client and you communicate the necessary things when they need to be communicated, you have vast amounts of control over the entire process. We can eliminate a lot of those misaligned expectations because you have such trust and confidence in your system that when someone throws something at you, like, oh, hey, we forgot to mention, we want to do a bar move after the cocktail hour. If you can move it into the reception, if you don't have solid systems and you're not confident in what you do and why you do it, you might be like, oh, okay, right? Instead of being, actually, we're happy to set up a secondary bar inside in advance, but what we won't do is move our bar. And here's why. And that level of confidence in your systems and experience that builds those systems makes you such a trusted partner in these events because you have control over all the variables and all the potentialities conceptually, right? And anyone who has executed an event knows once you're on site and things come up, you lose an aspect of control. But that's why it's so important for us to try and keep control and take control of as many of the variables ahead of time as possible. And also to keep an open line of communication with your clients so that there isn't any possible misaligned expectations. Every one of these will build on each other. And there's the old adage in systems development, it's like garbage in, garbage out. And so if you do a poor job onboarding, that's going to have an impact on at least the vibe and trust level throughout the entire experience. If you do a poor job during the planning stage, then your staging phase is going to be an absolute mess because you're having to go back and do a lot of the stuff that should have been done in the planning stage. And you might miss steps because you haven't given yourself enough space and time to ensure that it's done properly. Likewise, if your staging phase is lackluster, your execution stage, which is the fourth stage in this process, is going to suffer. So the execution is where we finally execute on our contracted services. This is where we have the least amount of control because there's a lot of other cooks in the kitchen making this happen. And it's also where the most amount of variables are at play. All your preparation up until this point is going to either make or break how this particular phase goes. It's important during the execution phase to stay flexible, to be prepared to solve problems on the fly, and to remind yourself, this is my favorite, we're not saving lives. We're serving drinks. We have a old member of this community who like to say, it's not if something goes wrong, it's when something goes wrong, because it's inevitable at every event that something is going to go wrong. And we just have to be prepared to figure it out when it happens.
Yeah, my favorite thing about this industry, we have a mobile bar checklist on our homepage as of the recording of this podcast that you can go and download. And that was actually created from the community. We sourced all of that from the community. And we asked them, like, what is absolutely necessary for your on-site kit? And the things that we got back were shocking to no one in the community, but to me, I was like, what? Why do you need safety pins? Like, there are so many things on that list that I was so surprised about that, like, you wouldn't think of. Go, if I started a mobile bar tomorrow, like, I wouldn't think of half of the things that are on that list. But these people have been in the industry for a long time. They're like, no, you're absolutely going to need safety pins. That to me was just absolutely beautiful.
My contribution to that list was an extra pair of socks. I have so many stories of the setup phase and accidentally spilling either water from the cooler or a Coke that exploded and suddenly is everywhere. And me having to work an entire shift in like wet, soggy socks was just absolutely miserable. I, to this day, still have an extra pair of socks in my purse. That is just one of those things that forever. It's kind of like when you become a parent and you start carrying wipes around and you realize like you should have always been carrying wipes around. Like, how did nobody before I had children share with me that having wipes on you at all times will save your butt in so many different ways? Like, I now carry socks and diaper wipes, and I don't even have a child in diaper anymore. Some of these things are just real life lessons, not even just business lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. My lover, he's such a like get it done, hardworking, buy your bootstraps kind of guy. And like the things, he always has like these super hard jobs, super tough jobs. He laid asphalt for a number of years. Now he's in die casting. It's always hot and sweaty. And the things he does just absolutely amazes me. The way he's able to persevere. And let me tell you, if that man's socks get wet, he is done. Like he has to take a full 48 hours off of work. Like it's like a trauma response. It's like of all the things that he can handle, he cannot handle wet socks. And so somebody out there in the world feels you on that one.
I feel so seen by Harley on a regular basis, and we've never met or talked to each other. Okay, so we've taken the operation phase and we've broken it into 5 phases. Within the execution stage, I invite people to break it down even further. And the reason that I do is because it becomes easier to train other people. It becomes easier to make it clear to the staff what the expectations are at every stage, what's required to be done before the next stage starts. So I'm just going to go through a suggestion of what I think would be a good outline for within the execution phase if you were trying to communicate, train your staff. So, for example, arrival. You might have a set of expectations as to what happens when someone arrives. So, make contact with the on-site contact, determine the setup location for the bar, gather whatever additional information you may need to succeed, such as where do vendors park, where is the ice machine if there is one, where would you like the trash to be put at the end of the night, etc. These might be things that you already inherently do as someone who's been doing this, or you own the business and this is just second nature. But when you go to train someone else on how to do these things, this won't be second nature. Believe me, when we talk about common sense, it ain't so common. Your brand of common sense may not be someone else's brand of common sense. So we want to be as specific as possible about the parts that really matter to a business. And the execution phase is that phase. I remember very vividly when I was onboarding a new bartender and we had glassware at this event, which is never my favorite because the rack's heavy, blah, right? So we had glassware. And so they start taking out the glassware and putting it on the back bar, but all the glasses are right side up. And like, I was like, why? Why would we do it that way? And for someone who like doesn't know any better, like who cares? Up or down, like no big deal. But like for me, I'm like, we want it upside down. We don't want bugs, and so we're outside. Like bugs are going to fly in there and stuff. Like we want them protected from the elements. And because the heavier base is up, we can now stack that. So we can have some on top of others, whereas it's not as stable if you do it the other way around. And so as you go through and move through your business, you're going to find that you need to document certain things that feel silly, but it's not silly. That's how we build a culture. It's how we build standards. It's how we build consistency and how we show up. And setting those expectations allows for the staff to feel safer. Now, that doesn't mean like if someone comes to you and says, hey, I know we've been stacking these upside down and that seems to be working, but I have this other idea, and this is why I have this idea. There's still opportunity there to continue to hone and perfect when you get feedback from your team. So by all means, like continue to take best practices, but as you find a best practice, solidify it into the way that things are done. Okay, so I wanted to continue with this example, and we don't have to go through the entire thing, but I do want to give people a little bit of an understanding as to how one funnels into the other and why it's important. So we talked about arrival and the various different things that would be considered part of the arrival process. The second suggested step here is setup. And that's where you physically set up the bar, you display menus, you organize the ingredients and equipment like glassware, and ensure that everything is in place and ready for service. So if I was creating a checklist for a staff member, it would become very clear to them when you arrive, do these things, boom, 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 boom. Once those things are done, we move into setup. This is what setup looks like. Boom, 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 boom. Once they've checked off all those little boxes, oh, okay, now we're done with all of those things. We can move into pre-service, might include where you do a final review with the team on the event details. Maybe you review the menu and all the ingredients, any potential allergens, make any last minute adjustments. Maybe, hey, the glassware's upside down. Let's flip that right side up, right? Whatever it is. It's also the opportunity for you to connect with the host or the event planner and just confirm with them, hey, we're all set up. We're ready. Anytime you want to start sending people over, we're good to go, right? Boom, boom, check those off. Now we are clear to move into service, right? We also, after service, what does that look like, right? Do you have a last call? What does last call indicate? Maybe it's not just when the drinks, are being handed out for the last time, but maybe that's also where you start breaking down one of the bars. Maybe you take all of the leftover wine and put it in boxes, whatever it looks like for you. When you break down the execution phase into kind of little micro phases, it becomes much easier to communicate with your team what should be expected based on where we are. So you could literally look at someone and say, hey, we're at last call. That means something to them, right? That means, oh, okay, that's triggering this thing and that thing and this thing and that thing, right? And so it's just a smoother way of ensuring that everybody knows how to succeed within this phase of the business. Lastly, and this is a phase that I think a lot of mobile bars sleep on, there's the offboarding phase. And this phase is what happens after the event has concluded. And while you might think that the important part, what you've done thus far, is over, you've executed the event. That's what they hired you to do. That's what you're contracted for. It's finished. You can move on with your life. It's also the phase that can like really seal the deal and create a real lasting impression for your client. So this is where you would want to express gratitude, gather feedback, and then guide the client towards what comes next. Do you have a repeat client program? If they loved your services, how can they be an advocate for you? What kind of people do you love working with? Who do you want them to refer you to? Who can you ask them, if they have clients, potential clients that fit your ideal client? This isn't the end, right? This is the end of this particular engagement, but it isn't necessarily the end of the relationship. And so put some thought into your offboarding. What does it look like? How do you want to leave a good, solid, lasting impression that aligns with your values so that you can really wrap up, this particular engagement in a way that, again, aligns with your values and makes everyone feel good. The Sexy Selling Client Experience workshop that we did, we talked a lot about intentional creation of client touch points. And every single phase that we talked about And every single like micro phase that we talked about is a potential touch point. And at every touch point, we want you to think through, what do you want your client to think, feel, or believe, and do? And so when you're offboarding your client, be very clear about what, to yourself, what do you want them to think? What do you want them to feel or believe? And what do you want them to do at this stage? So if I'm doing an offboarding with a client, then I will probably use verbiage that, like, we had a fantastic time executing your event. We hope that you and your guests also enjoyed the service and the cocktails. And then believe and feel, I might say something like, if you felt well taken care of, right? Use the language. If you felt well taken care of, like we met or exceeded your expectations for the beverage experience at your event, we would love to invite you to tell the world via a review, as reviews help small businesses do business. And then for the do piece, obviously we just asked them to leave a review, but also, we'd love to serve you in the future, or your loved ones. Should there be an opportunity, please don't hesitate to drop our name, refer us to people that you think would find value in our service, etc. Now you can send, again, some people like to send them little tokens of appreciation or swag or that sort of thing. And you can absolutely do that, but make sure that you wrap it in more than just a thing. We're not just sending a thing and saying like, thanks so much. We're wrapping it in a narrative as to what thoughts, beliefs, and actions we want to leave them with.
Yeah, and this is really the difference. There are so many differences, but this is the core difference between the mass market buying experience and the premium market buying experience. And so here at Mobile Bev Pros, we focus heavily on the premium market, and that experience just has a totally different, well, first of all, it's an experience. Mass market purchasing is less of an experience, right? You think about buying something from Temu or Temu. I don't know that they know how to say their name. Every ad they show me says it differently, but you buy something. It's not really an experience. You get it in. It's might be a piece of crap, but you paid $1.99 for a whole hoodie. So probably, you're not expecting much. But like you go to the mall and each store is its own immersive experience. You go in, they have very specific smells. To this day, I can smell Hollister and Abercrombie from the late 90s, early 2000s, right? You go into Hot Topic, they're playing a very specific type of music. The purchasing experience is different, and that's more of a premium experience. Then you can get into ultra premium, which is still in the same vein, but it has a lore. It has a fairy tale quality to it where you're being taken out of your day-to-day monotony and you're really experiencing something unlike anything else, right? And so having each touch point, as you pointed out, being really intentionally crafted is what's going to set you apart from somebody who just shows up with a folding table, throws, a Walmart tablecloth over top of it and has the red Solo cups, right? Like you're going to be providing something that is exquisite. And so it's important to think through each one of these touch points and what you really want your client to be experiencing at every step with you on this journey, because that's what it is. Ultimately, this portion of operations is the client journey from start to finish, or at least, from paid to finish.
What you just referenced there was really tapping into the sensory components of an experience. And we are really well primed, this industry, to lean into those sensory experiences. Like you can taste what we serve, you can touch, the bar, you can smell the herbs and the citrus when you're there. And we can lean into those sensory components both before they come in contact with us and after, because we all know the crispness of lemon. We all know the refreshingness of mint. And so, not that we're talking about these things today, but in your marketing, one of the reasons why photos of delicious cocktails with herbal garnishes and bright colors do better is because they evoke emotions in people, because it helps them with their eyes connect to other senses that they have. I know what a banana smells like. So when I see a banana, like I'm already getting certain messages in my brain. When I see a mojito, like I can almost taste it, you know. I'm like, oh, that looks so good. Not because I can taste the picture, but because my brain is already lighting up in ways that knows what a mojito tastes like, and also associates it with the feelings that I'm having in other ways around that mojito. When I drink a mojito, I'm usually like on vacay. I'm usually like chilling with my friends and family. I'm usually in a relaxed state. So just seeing that mojito is bringing up all of those triggers for me. And we can use more of that in our communication with clients, not just during marketing, not just during sales, but throughout the entire operating part. So when you send information on your cocktail menu, make it visually appealing, make it beautiful and appetizing to the eye. Use descriptive words in your emails. You know, yes, you can get to the point, but also don't be afraid to like create some flourishes and tell some stories even after they've paid you. All of that is part of the entire narrative. But yeah, so I think we gave people a bunch of information today, potentially a framework from which they've never really viewed their operations. And if this was something that you enjoyed, there's a fun new feature through our podcast provider. If you go to our show notes page, that allows you to send us texts. We can't respond back to you, but you can send fan mail. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, some potentially like topics that you'd like to hear more about. Send fan mail if you have the opportunity.
Another wonderful episode. Thanks so much. We'll see you guys on the next one.
And that wraps up today's episode. I hope it was valuable. I would love to hear from you what you thought. You can drop me a line at hello@mobilebevpros.com or find me on Instagram at mobilebevpros. If you're looking for more valuable mobile bar related content, we have a website full of it. You can find us at www.mobilebevpros.com. And I'd love to see you in our Facebook community, also by the name of, you guessed it, Mobile Bev Pros. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, cheers.